I cried in the last 2 days. You cannot imagine. Yesterday, I had Syrian friends come over to my place at 2 a.m. We were crying. We're really confused. But I'm sad because nobody congratulated me without a but. But what is the alternative? Allow the Syrians to celebrate. This is colossal.
Absolutely, at least for a few days, because it has been a stunning victory, hasn't it? And it started just over a week ago, city after city falling into rebel hands. How do you explain it? What do you think happened? Why did this regime collapse so quickly after so many decades?
I think the rebels were lucky to seize the moment, the opportunity. Without Israel, this wouldn't have been possible. What I mean is, had Hezbollah not been beaten up badly in Lebanon, this wouldn't happen. They would have sent reinforcement to Damascus. So the timing was lucky. I also would like to say that we all know the Americans and the Russians have boots on the ground. Why didn't they strike the rebels? I think there is an arrangement, and Turkey is aware of it. I know this is a dangerous game, and I see the risks, and I see the extremists on the ground. I also see what's happening, and the developments are promising for the region. Who would have thought peace between Syria and Israel?
Wow. Maybe one day. All right. Thank you, Rawan. Stay with us. Let me bring in Ariel, because the big question on a lot of people's lips is, where is Bashar al-Assad? The Russians said that he had left the country. He's no longer in Syria. It would be very dangerous for him if he was. Do we have any idea where he's gone?
Unfortunately, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, or no news on that front, because it is unclear the whereabouts of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. In the earlier hours of the afternoon, there were even insinuations that his plane may have been downed and leaving Syria. That has not been confirmed, and I think we should put those reports aside. It wouldn't be surprising if he emerges one day in somewhere in an allied country to his regime, be it Iran or Russia. There have been reports that he's in the Gulf, but I think for Syrians, many of them, like the sentiment that Rawan voiced, they want to look forward. They're looking forward to taking back control of their country, taking back control over their future. Syrian expats who I've been talking to have been voicing the exact same sentiment. Haven't slept in days, have been following events, glued to the TV or to Twitter, really hoping that this is now a dawn of a new age. Now, I personally met Rawan in an interfaith group in Auschwitz, and back then when we met, we talked about perhaps one day meeting, whether it be in Damascus or in Israel. And now, for the first time in living memory, for myself at least, this is potentially an opportunity. I mean, there are still many questions moving forward regarding the future of Syria, and in the short term, there's a lot of jubilation and joy. Families reunited after decades of some of their loved ones being imprisoned in political jails. Many of
But we will have to think about what comes next. But you're right. I mean, for many, and Rawan, I'm sure you agree with this, people thought that the Assad regime would simply be around forever if it had survived the protests after that brutal crackdown in 2011. Many people didn't see this day coming. But Ariel, as you were saying, you know, looking at the images today on social media, I think one of the most shocking and moving images has been of the prisons, when the prisoners were broke free, and especially one prison, I think, when we saw small children had been held inside.
Yeah, Sayadna prison, holding women, and it was nicknamed the slaughterhouse by those who managed to survive it. Really harrowing images of women, a toddler no older than 4 years old. We're about to see him right now. It's not clear whether he was born in prison or imprisoned as a baby, as a toddler. This is how the Assad regime instilled his power, through brute force, through imprisoning anyone who voiced dissent or disagreement or just simply didn't follow the rules of the dictatorship, and the rebels advancing since the start of their campaign. Already in Aleppo, we've been seeing these images. Every town, major city that they've liberated, we see these images of political prisoners being liberated, and many of them haven't seen their loved ones for decades. There was a heart-wrenching video of one man who lost all his memory. He didn't know where he was from.
Didn't know who he was.
Didn't know who he was,
literally.
where his family was. And this is part of the challenge for Syria moving forward, to rebuild. And that's why the head of the Syrian opposition abroad was talking to Reuters in Doha, saying that he calls for an 18-month transition period before free election. These coming days, weeks, and months for Syria are going to be a time of rejoicing, but also to rebuild. And it will be very fascinating to see how all the various factions and sects can come together, if they can come together, in order to build a new future for Syria.
Rawan, I want to get a comment from you on that, because the use of these jails, these torture chambers by the Assad regime is one of the darkest aspects of this regime, wasn't it?
The Syrian people have been terrified for the last 50 years of someone reporting something you said about the president. You might be lost in the system because it was hardly digitalized. That was the horror. You know, I talked on social media about George Orwell. Here in Europe, I have friends who can't read the book because it's traumatizing. But Orwellian has been the reality of the Syrians for over 5 decades. And one of the ironies is watching sometimes on Al Jazeera Palestinian prisoners who make calls on TV demanding, I don't know, whatever they want, in prison in Israel. They threaten to go on a hunger strike. They threaten to stop going out in the yard. And we just listen to this. It's mind-boggling for us Syrians, because some Syrian prisoners never see the air. They're kept, like, they're held 7 stories underground, and they're not given food or given rotten food. So having the luxury to say, I will go on a hunger strike, is something that makes us secretly laugh. Like, are you for real? What happened in Syria is very confusing. You can see on the faces of the prisoners, they don't understand. They've given up. And even on the Umayyad Square, one of the biggest squares in Damascus, people were celebrating, but they were also confused. They were just standing around, looking around them. I don't think they have ever imagined life in Syria without al-Assad. So when they demanded freedom, many of them didn't know what they're talking about. The challenge now, as Ariel said, is to rebuild, prevent extremists from taking over. I trust that this is the plan, or they committed to preventing extremism from taking over. Otherwise, the solution will be a military solution, and it will be supported by the millions of secular Syrians living abroad. These times are different from back in 2011 or 2012.
Well, do you think the refugees, because as I said, half the country was displaced, millions of Syrians fled the country. Do you think that Syrians, particularly young Syrians, will be looking to go home now?
Definitely. You will see and you will be surprised. So many around the world will go back in a heartbeat. And we need these energies, these talents to build a Syria for everybody. And I think people understood what extremism has done to the country, and they know that nobody could care less about the suffering of the Syrians, and that the Palestinian cause has always been a pretext to abuse, for dictators to abuse their peoples. We've seen this movement around the world supporting Gaza, and we haven't seen 1% of that. Despite what happened to the Syrians, and you've just said more than half of the country had to flee.